Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. This is our classic movie discussion, episode 70.3, and tonight we're going to discuss one of our films from a 1986 in review, Howard the Duck. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzel. I'm one of your hosts here on the No Name Cinema Society. I got two other hosts to introduce you momentarily. I'm back in New York, in the Nolita section of New York. As most fans know, I go back and forth over the course of the year. I've done 4 shows in this particular apartment. Most recently was our final sound-off of last year, in which Devon did a diatribe, and I counted down the top 5 father-daughter films of all time. I think that was episode 69.4. So you can look that up on YouTube. It's become a tradition on our show to, for the first classic of each season, to look at an individual film from the year that we've just finished studying. Like, for example, in 2018, we watched Mrs. Miniver, which we had just finished studying for the 1942 in review. In 2019, we watched The Last Temptation of Christ from 1988. In 2020, we watched North by Northwest from 1959. And last year, our first classic was El Topo from 1970. So tonight, we'll be digging deeper on one of the films from our 1986 in review. I said Howard the Duck from director Willard Huyck. So I got my intros and my co-hosts here tonight, starting with a handsome sleazoid that comes from a planet populated entirely by TV actors. Devon Michaels is here.
Sleazoiding right here at the iconic Dodger Stadium.
Devon live from Chavez Ravine, reporting on the goings-on there. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce our next host. She's the lead singer of the band Cherry Bomb and is also the newest member of the society, debuting in her first show, everybody, Melanie Risch-Ho, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Melanie, to the show. Are you excited?
I'm very excited. It's a long time coming.
So here's the schedule. I don't know how to segue to it. That's the best I got. Here's the schedule for this, which is our 70th series of episodes, if you can believe that. Tonight, of course, for the classic movie discussion of Howard the Duck. Mel will be back with us for our 54th sound off, which she has no idea what's going to happen. But I can tell you little things. We're going to do a tweet beat based on the films that we're doing from 1986 and our finales related to 2021, the Oscar preview in the top 10. I'm going to do a book review, and Max and I will be counting down our top 5 films of 1986. And I know Devon will be excited to tune into that one. He's got some opinions on 1986.
I watched a lot.
His girlfriend, of course, was also in 1986 in review. All right, so now the question is, guys, I'm going to be alone, I bet. Devon's already, he's not even home. Who's drinking with me? Anybody got some alcohol? Tea does not count, Mel.
I have water. I don't even have
I might soon be getting a premium beer.
A $20 premium beer?
$20, but I don't have one currently in hand.
Well, I'm going to drink by myself with the audience with this Elysian Space Dust IPA. Here is the drinking game that you, the fans, reach out to us with all the things you do in the show that you guys drink to. And so we consolidated it to this list so all can play along with the society drinking game. Of course, this is Mel's first show, so she doesn't have anything on this list yet. But for Devon, whenever he says there's something about, everybody drinks. And whenever I say all-time, contrivance, contrived, verisimilitude, or diegesis, you guys are supposed to drink. But cheers to you guys, the audience. Hope you guys get drunk along with me tonight. So it is another tradition that we do every time we hit 10th set. Like, for example, this is our 70th set of episodes. So every time we hit 40, 50, 60, we go through our last 10 classics, just to give you a sense of the last 10 classics that we talked about on the show. So here it is listed with episode number here on the left-hand side. The 30s and 50s, strangely not represented on this list. The 60s and 80s are the most represented with 3 each, including 2 from 1960 proper. There is 1 Best Picture winner on this list. None of the other films out of these 10 were Best Picture nominees. Devon, of course, was on 2 of these shows, Earth Girls Are Easy, and naturally tonight for Howard the Duck.
Well, Earth Girls Are Easy was a particularly good show.
I really enjoyed doing that show, even though we argued. Mel has probably not even heard of Earth Girls Are Easy.
No, I haven't.
Mel, anything on this list strike you?
I mean, the apartment is amazing.
That's the 1 Best Picture winner I was referring to. Do you want to tell the audience who recommended The Apartment to you?
Doesn't matter. Baby recommended The Apartment to me.
Yay!
Opened up my cinema world.
Here she is. She now graduated to be a member of the society. So.
Oh, she's all grown up.
When I took my first step,
Now, getting into this film a little bit, Howard the Duck, we always go over the trivia that I said in the last classic. that pertains to this one. And what I said, it is our tradition to have the first classic of the year be one of the films from the year that we said the year before, which is 1986. So it seems only fitting that the first classic we review from 1986 will also be the first film that we watched from 1986, all together as a group last June. And the blog watchers, I said the blog watchers would get that one, and here's why. Take a look.
Now, we always like to start at the bottom of the year. And like the bottom of the totem pole. It's time for Tootsie Rolls right now.
It's always time for Tootsie.
Tootsie Pops, I should say. Start at the bottom of the totem pole and work our way up to the big Oscar winners and nominees and box office hits. Last year, for example, the 1970 review, the first film I watched was Hercules in New York, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger's first film. He was billed as Arnie Schwartz, which is kind of funny. So we have a little bit of different film here tonight. You guys ready for the reveal of the film? You guys having fun yet? All right. Yeah. This is only just beginning. There it is. And the winner is, please be there. Yes! It's Howard the Duck! Oh, I gotta watch my step or Tootsie Pops. I'm gonna step on Tootsie Pops. Howard the Duck from 1986, one of the biggest box office bombs in movie history, guys. That which is not a reflection on the film itself necessarily. I, for one, used to watch it all the time as a kid, as a 30-year-old kid, of course. As a, on loop, I used to watch this film and not seen it really since. So it'll be interesting to revisit. If you think about the big box office bombs in movie history, you think about Cleopatra was one of the ones that people remember the first, which we reviewed in episode 31.3, Dr. Dolittle in 1967, Heaven's Gate in 1980, Howard the Duck in 86, Ishtar in 87, and Waterworld in 1995. But if you think about a lot of those films, guys, a lot of them have been revisited. Cleopatra was actually still the highest grossing film of 1963, and we actually thought it was pretty good.
We had a very fun night, at least. Well, what'd you think of that vlog there?
That was the most energetic thing I've seen from the No Name System.
Devin, you were there. Did you feel the energy?
I have no memory of that.
We didn't do a lot of drugs that night, I promise. The thing that I wanted to bring out is just historically where Howard the Duck sort of sits. And, we could talk about that over the course of the evening because, for years and years, it was sort of this joke in the movie industry as being such a big box office bomb, along with those other films that I talked about, Cleopatra, Ishtar, etc. Now, like a lot of those films, are being reevaluated, and Howard the Duck has this cult status, especially with the reemergence of Marvel. All right, you guys ready to jump into the summary?
Do it.
All right,
Yes.
Here we go. Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck lives happily in his own egg-shaped world when he's suddenly sucked out of the privacy of his own home into the mean streets of 80s Cleveland on the planet Earth, which is populated by the strangest creatures he's ever seen, human beings. All right, so normally for opening thoughts, I start out with screening notes because a lot of these, when we review a classic of the films, it means I've screened it at one of my classic movie screenings, either in New York or Los Angeles, which sort of sets things up by summarizing what the general feedback was when I screened the film. But since this film was Max, Kelly, Devin, and I, we couldn't really talk about it afterwards because we were doing the 1986 review show. There was no real screening notes that time. All I can say, Devin, you don't remember the evening, but I had a really fun night. And that's not a reflection on the film itself. I'm just saying the overall night was fun. I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the film. It may, but it may not.
So we watched the movie that night?
Maybe he brought drugs that didn't tell me. Before you do any thoughts, speaking of screenings, we had one in New York the other night that Mel here was attended. And I made the mistake of mentioning to the group that Mel had to watch Howard the Duck for the first time, and all hell broke loose at this screening. And they said some awful things about it. Some of which I was actually suspicious if they actually saw the film, and they said those things based on reputation alone. Mel's preformed complex has been totally tainted here. It was ruined in advance of the film, so we'll see how that affected her assessment. Devin's usually terrible at these, so I make him go second, but it's Mel's first show, so I will let Devin go first for a rare time, who was at our screening. So Devin, you know the rules. Opening thoughts, one sentence or less.
It's a oft maligned, but I think overly maligned, strange movie that didn't quite find the tone that it was going for, but still has a lot of great humor and some things going for it.
And just so Mel knows, that is not a good opening thought. That was way too long. The whole point is thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing, a brief couple notes. So watch some other shows, some other people do it. You'll see how it's done. But here's your first shot, opening thoughts, one sentence or less.
Strange and unsettling in a bad way.
Yeah, no, I gathered that. That's a very good opening thought. I don't agree with it, but it's a good opening thought. So cheers to you on nailing opening thoughts first time out. Devin, you can learn from the Padawan here.
Yeah, Devin.
Stand by my sentence with only 2 or 3 clauses in it.
My opening thoughts is I have a lot of fun every time I watch this movie, but not quite enough fun. and we'll dig into that.
Basically what I said.
But more succinct, which is the point of opening thoughts. So fans will know, probably better than Mel, we tend to like to start positive. Now, all the elements that we normally talk about, direction, screenplay, performance, etc., are all a mixed bag for me. Some good things, many weak areas. So I wasn't exactly sure where to start. So I guess I'm going to start with direction and talk about the duck itself. I think the creation and execution of the actual character was very strong. I tend to prefer tangible costumes and puppetry versus CGI. It was groundbreaking in both areas for its time. And I think that's true of a lot of the special effects. Maybe they overused them in terms of choices, but that doesn't make the execution of them any less impressive. I even liked a lot of the detail of the creature at the end, appropriately gross. The makeup design was really strong too in the second half of the film when it was called upon. Devon?
Yeah, I really overall liked the world building. There were a lot of groaners in terms of some of the funny production design.
They missed from a comedic point of view, but they were well designed, like intentional.
Yes, the consistency of those was solid.
I agree with you from a design point of view. Mel, the design, effects, makeup, etc.
Well, what was Howard?
It's a combination of puppetry, and there was some costume elements, but
it was consistent. It was campy and weird and consistent. I found it very unsettling though, because it was like this combination of like the duck itself, like its eyes were kind of human-y, but then like its hands, I don't know. It was just it was bizarre, but I guess the whole world did feel a bit like that. Like everything was just like elevated. And
I think those are all choices with some other goals in mind. Particularly, I thought the palm side of the hands were actually very human. The other side had the feathers. So like that, I noticed that was, and I thought that was an interesting intentional choice. Very different. The comic actually is intentionally made to look like Donald Duck, a dirty version of Donald Duck. The Marvel guy who invented Howard was sticking it to Disney, like mocking Disney, but they shipped it for the movie for a lot of legal reasons because Disney was very litigious at the time, if not still. Before I get to some of the bad things, some other good things I thought about the direction, or good-ish. You'll see, there's always a but at the end of these. But I thought it was fascinating the amount of careful attention paid to the mise-en-scène. There's so many intertextual references in the created world and not just in the unnecessary opening sequence. Some were more subtle and some were more obvious. Many were connected to the popular films of the crowd that director Hoyt hung out with. He hung out with Lucas and Spielberg and Coppola, etc. Those were his guys. And sometimes it's not just references to something specific, but just the film tropes in general. But it wasn't just references. It was just an extraordinary level of detail. It's almost as if that was more important to the director than the story or acting, which I will get to. One example that springs to mind is at a point when Howard buzzes all the duck hunters in his little flying machine. After he does that, a solitary earth duck flies through unharmed, and just a small detail that doesn't get paid attention to. There's a lot of those little moments in the film that would be great direction if other elements of the film were working. Mel, I don't know if you noticed a lot of these little things. Some were obvious, some were not. Mise-en-scène in general for Willard Hoyt.
I didn't notice those things. And I was actually to be honest, I found it really hard to focus on the craft of the film because I think I'm so not into like a movie about a creepy duck. So it was really, but I kept being like, okay, focus on the shots. And I felt like directorially, nothing actually pulled me out. I felt like I was in like good directorial hands in that regard. I felt like it was actually quite well executed in terms of like how it was visually directed. But I didn't notice those details, I don't think.
And to be fair, I've watched it many, many times, and this is my second time in a 12-month period watching it. But it's interesting, a lot of my things are, this was really good, but a lot of your things are, this is really bad, but here are some good things. It's like a reverse approach. Devon, anything on mise-en-scène?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I was getting at with the consistent campy world building comment earlier. I like a lot of those. There were parts that were reminiscent of like a Zucker Abraham kind of style of doing that.
Right, but there were parts that were not, which I'm saying now as a tease to something I've got coming up.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there were parts that were more subtle, and I appreciated those. To me, it contributes to the overall charm of the piece, even though it mostly misses in terms of capturing the darkness of this character. It's not quite going all the way to honoring the comic, but it's not quite completely sanitizing it either. So it is this weird no man's land of halfway grotesqueness. but I find it fun.
Devin and I are strangely in sync tonight, so much that he's like stealing things that I'm going to say later on. So I pretty much agree with a lot of that. The last positive thing I have from a directorial point of view is I thought many of the action scenes, while they lacked in choreography, were really well covered and edited, which is not something I always say. And I think this is part of what Mel was alluding to and not being taken out. They weren't masterpieces of action per se, but they were serviceable and seemed to be all the right shots for all the right moments to get the idea of what was happening. And a lot of modern action scenes do not have that. Again, what was happening wasn't necessarily impressive, but the shot choices were right, and they moved at what seemed to be the right pace. And when I think about the action sequences, I'm talking about the flying with the little machine, the car chase, some of Howard's fights, not all. But Mel, anything on the action?
Well, I had that same thought when they were flying the plane. I was like, we're flying. I don't know how this is happening, but we're on the plane. When the guy's like in the water, I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like he's actually looks like he's being dragged through water. But
I hope they dragged Tim Robbins through water. I would love that.
yeah, it was committed, I would say. Yeah.
And they should be committed.
Devin talked about this already a little bit. And here's where I started to get a little like questioning about the direction. And this is going to be about the tone. And yes, the comics were edgy, borderline vulgar, with more action, darker comedy, and real world undercurrents. And according to Hoyt, his original vision was more along these lines, but the studio got involved. So even though this is under the category of direction, we just have to react to what we see. So the result is a film that doesn't know if it wants to be a kid's movie, a parody, an action movie, a superhero story, or a love story. It is possible for something to be all of those things, but this film lacked the balance to pull it off. The slapstick didn't work with the sci-fi. Every pratfall and ill-timed one-liner lowered the stakes, and then there were times when they were leaning on the stakes when they just weren't there. One particular scene feels like Three Stooges, which is fine, but then the next feels like early Sam Raimi, and it never really gels. That plays into my other issue, which is maybe a counterpoint to what Devin says, but I think he was using the phrase world building differently than I'm about to. Wholeness of world is what I call it. Hoyt seemed to shape the world scene by scene instead of having an overall vision. And to his point, that might have been changed for him. The grungy punk scene doesn't seem to coexist with her sizable apartment, or Phil's wild world of science, or the cops, or the hick diner crowd, and none of it seems to work with the outer space demons. The film that this needed to be more like is another from 1986 that I think Devin and I share an affection for.
Oh, the one with the boys, the Explorers?
No, that's 85. But also from my top 5 sci-fi comedies of all time, from 1986, Short Circuit is remarkably similar in structure, and I think is a good example in terms of the differences a director can make in terms of tone and wholeness of world. I understand that Johnny Five is not from outer space, but the relationships, the difficulty of assimilation, the fish or fowl out of water, learning to adjust in a new environment, it's all there. And one of the many maxims I repeat on this show is that flights of fancy, ideas of fantasy, work a lot better if they feel like they take place in a recognizable world. And I feel like Short Circuit accomplishes that. E.T. is perhaps another example. Howard the Duck chooses to be something more heightened, perhaps to appeal to a younger crowd, and I think that wound up being a mistake. So I talked about a lot there: tone, wholeness of world, Short Circuit as a potential template for what it could have been. Devin, anything on all of that?
I mostly just agree. It's a hodgepodge.
I love that
hits and misses almost in equal amounts, really. I love watching movies so much that I end up leaning more towards appreciating the parts that did work. Not just because I have an affection for it, because I was 12 or so when it came out. Like you said, it's hitting some of these tones or worlds one at a time instead of cohesively. I really like how it goes for noir. That's almost funny enough to sustain a whole piece if they just stayed with one way of approaching it, but then they are trying to do 4 or 5 other things.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that. I do want to get to Mel, but I'm particularly curious about your thoughts on this sort of Short Circuit reference as a template for this.
I think what resonated with me about that reference is just the charm of some of the sweetness. That even though there's the darkness, and obviously Howard is a much darker character than Johnny Five, I still think that some of the relationships, along with some of the weird, vulgar material, had a real sweetness to them in both of those films in a similar way.
But this could have been a little stronger in that way.
This could have been, yeah.
Mel, anything on any of that stuff?
I agree that it tonally didn't land fully. I wasn't sure like how to feel about Howard, the main character. I had trouble like figuring out what kind of a character he was supposed to be. If he was supposed to be like endearing and like I don't know, because you can root for a character that you find kind of grotesque. Then I was like, oh, do they want me to think he's like kind-hearted and like sweet? I don't know. But then yeah, there were just these like moments of like vulgarness that almost felt out of nowhere, and so I was just like, how am I supposed to feel about this stuff?
You make a really good point, because I mean, they didn't decide on what Howard would be. They wanted Howard to be everything, and he'll say like inappropriate things, and he'll smoke cigars or whatever, and then all of a sudden he'll be super sweet. And
yeah, you're like, is he supposed to be cute?
They wanted it all, and they couldn't quite pull it off. It's time to talk about the next thing that I thought had some good elements and some bad elements, and that's going to be performances. And another element that historically Devon and I both have affection for, Devon, is
Lea Thompson.
Lea Thompson. Perhaps for different reasons, but as much as I crush on Lea Thompson and have for 35 years, and in spite of all the obstacles in her way, I think she does a terrific job here. I actually think at times she displays comic instincts that are often reminiscent of Irene Dunne at her best, for those of you that know that 30s actress. There are one or two moments that didn't quite ring as true, but in each case, it felt to me like a bad script or directing choice. Like she couldn't make gulping work when displaying nervousness. I don't know many actors who could. She shouldn't have been asked to do that, I think. Yeah. Her presence, her charisma, her charm, and timing are one of the highlights of the film for me. Devon, I know how you feel, so let's see how Mel feels about Lea Thompson.
Yeah, I don't think it was like an acting thing. I think the script had very large issues.
We'll get to that. We're working our way down.
She committed very well, did a better job than a lot of people would with like the lines and everything play out. I thought that she was very committed. I didn't have like performance issues with anyone, actually.
Well, I do have some performance issues, which I'll get to, but I not with her. Committed, I think, is a good word. Like you believe that she believed the world that she was living in, and and her connection to Howard, that was honest to me.
Yeah, I mean, not only did I believe her, again, aside from those couple of moments that were not really her fault, she was not only believable, but choosing a really lovely tone that grounded us whenever we were not being pulled too far afield by all the other elements that weren't working. I agree. I think she also played some of those comedic moments really well, and with a charm that was outside of the 80s and outside of all 5 of the genres that this film was and was just in itself a quality piece of comedic acting. For sure, and something you said really stuck. I mean, like it was very specific characters, so different from what you've seen of her over the years, whether it be Space Camp all from 1986 and also Back to the Future, obviously. Such a different character, showing some range that her daughter now seems to be able to also have, so that's kind of cool as well. My favorite Lea Thompson story as relates to Howard the Duck is, of course, it was a huge hit. Like opening weekend, they knew we got a stinker on our hands, like not from a quality point of view, again, just at the box office. She was shooting this film, Some Kind of Wonderful, which is a script written by John Hughes. No one wanted to talk to her that day on set. Everyone was like avoiding her. She was like crying. She was trying to focus on the scene she had to do, but like she was worried that this Howard the Duck debacle was going to be the end of her career. And she always said she had a great time working on the movie, and she had high hopes for the film. It was like going to be one of the films of the summer, and it just did terribly. She was devastated. And then the director saw that, and he came over and he started comforting her. And then, Devon, they got married.
They did get married, and then produced
babies.
Specifically, Zoe Deutsch, currently one of the better young actresses around town. And of course, the director of Some Kind of Wonderful, who she married, also directed one of our 1986 films, Devon.
Oh my gosh.
Written by the same writer as Some Kind of Wonderful. One that Kelly and I agreed on for one of the categories.
Not Pretty in Pink.
Yeah, Pretty in Pink.
Oh.
See? Full circle!
Full circle.
All the test and you passed.
I didn't even do the homework.
So unfair. Some people get by without doing any of their homework.
Yeah, it's true. Next performance that I want to talk about, that in spite of his off-camera issues, I continue to be impressed with Jeffrey Jones, his flexibility and commitment to character. I question some of the script choices as relates to both aspects of his character, but damn it, if he didn't go balls to the wall to deliver what the director wanted. There's certainly a certain silliness to the idea that has more to do with lack of setup, which I'll get to, but I never didn't believe that he was possessed by a demon. I mentioned the makeup, which helped, but so much of it is him as well. And I find him entirely believable as the regular scientist guy, too. It's a great range in spite of script issues. Mel, Jeffrey Jones as Jennings.
Yeah, it was disgusting. Thing came out of his mouth. That's what
Right, but it was supposed to disgust you. You realize that was a choice to disgust you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't have any issues with his performance. I thought it was good. Again, he committed.
His legal history has clouded some of these great performances. Devon Jeffrey Jones.
Outstanding.
I think he could have been like a long time, like great character actor, even like an occasional Oscar nominee. Even his other 1986 performance is iconic.
He's amazing, but I agree with Mel. It's almost hard to appreciate because of how grotesque it is.
They made a choice to be grotesque, and the kids, might have enjoyed it. 12-year-old boys might have gotten into that. I don't love that as much, but I do want to take the time to appreciate what he brought to the table, because you can tell what he's doing versus what the effects are doing, and I think he's bringing a lot to that.
For sure. But I was never a 12-year-old boy, even when I was a 12-year-old boy.
He's closer to being a 12-year-old boy now.
I've never been a 12-year-old boy either.
Mel's best line of the night, everybody!
That'll be my drinking line every time I say that.
And now to one of my least favorite actors of all time, and the sole Oscar winner in the cast. So there is another Oscar nominee actor in this film. The characterization of Tim Robbins is way too much for me. I can see why Howard was annoyed by him all the time. It seems to be a very specific choice to go cartoony with his human character, perhaps to blur those lines even further. That might have worked if they were more like him, and B, if he were more consistent. He was different types of cartoony from one scene to another in a very all-over-the-place kind of way. I often found his choices to be as extreme as possible every time, without much thought as to what kind of extreme he was doing. One thing I will give him, he was pretty good at fainting, but that's just about it. Mel, Oscar winner Tim Robbins.
Didn't really bother me. I felt like that his character was supposed to be that heightened, I guess.
Maybe, but I think it was a little too much. And it wasn't specific enough heightened. It's like, go be heightened, and then you just did it differently each time. That's the way I look at it.
I did feel that, like, he started off so one thing, but then when he's, like, off with Howard towards like the end of the movie, he changed,
but not in a character way. Just like
is it character evolution or
just inconsistent acting? Yeah.
To be honest, I didn't think about it while I was watching. I wasn't like, oh, he's like falling apart. I suppose that's true.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. That he missed this one. He was young, and I think he probably just assumed like we're making a Nickelodeon channel thing for kids, and I just need to be big, 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 and doesn't matter if I'm specific. And in general, he happened into some better moments in that final act, just almost in spite of his own lack of decision to commit to this performance.
So yeah, I mean, like with all that inconsistency though, and you talk about his choices, he thought he was in a different movie. Where is Willard Huyck during all this? Like, in fairness to Tim Robbins, and I don't like being fair to Tim Robbins, but I will be, where is a director to say, hey, dial it down, dude, Right.
That does fall on the director. I agree.
So now with that Tim Robbins discussion, I said he was the one Oscar winner in the cast in terms of acting. Does anybody know trivia who the other Oscar nominated actor was that appeared in Howard the Duck? First clue is it's related to a show that is open on Broadway right now. And he's the same actor plays the same part in the show. He's back on Broadway in the same show that he was Oscar nominated for.
Oh.
It's a small role in the film. David Paymer appears in Howard the Duck. He has one line as one of the scientists, and he was in Mr. Saturday Night, got his Oscar nomination in 1992, now on Broadway as a musical, and he plays the same role as Billy Crystal's brother. All right, so finally, I do want to make a brief mention of Chip Zien, who was the voice of Howard, one of many people who brought Howard to life. But in terms of the vocals, I felt that at least half the delivery of his line was a little big. Now, Zien is a Broadway veteran, perhaps most famous for originating one of the leads in Into the Woods on Broadway, and so it stands to reason that a lot of his delivery felt more theatrical in nature, and on film, it seemed to kill a lot of the jokes. Some of the jokes weren't very good to begin with, which we'll get to, but I feel like I feel strongly that he did kill a few of them. That also goes on the director, too, on some level, especially when you're doing voice acting, because there's really no reason not to do it again if it's not working, and you've got the cut of the film to work with. There's no real good excuse not to have good voice acting in a lot of cases. Chip Zien, I feel like he missed a lot of these lines.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. even think of that until now. The fact that there's less of an excuse when you're just in a little room with a microphone.
I mean, that's my feeling on it. Mel?
Yeah, I think I agree. Having done voice acting.
Hope you did it better than that.
I still question like how much of that is like the writing when you're unsure, like as an actor, of like the tone.
That's the director's job. I did mention that. I mentioned the writing killed some of the jokes, but I do feel like listening to the jokes, in some cases, I said about 50%, there were some jokes that I thought seemed okay on the page that he just missed. That's my opinion. It
just like felt flat, or it's like the wrong timing, or I know what you mean. I guess I agree, but I still am like, is that the actor's fault? You know?
I will crap on the dialogue shortly. Don't worry, I'll get to that. But we're talking about performances, and so I like I said, I think it's a mixed bag all around. Like I feel like the director is to blame to some degree, but Chip Zien is the one delivering it, and he didn't deliver. I wish he had more of a safety net to fall on from a directing point of view. In some cases, the writing wasn't good. In some cases, I think the jokes could have worked, or could have worked better.
Think about how different it would have been if Robin Williams stuck with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Robin Williams?
Yeah, Robin Williams. He's an actor that worked a lot in the 80s and 90s now. On to the weakest element and Mel's area of expertise. Before I turn to Mel, I'm going to turn to our self-appointed comedy czar to talk about the dialogue here. Devon, I feel like while there were some pretty good lines, many just weren't that funny, or at least not funny enough. And frequently I felt like there's a funny line that could have been there that they chose the wrong line. Sometimes I wonder if the actor blew it, like I said, but overall, this movie should have been much funnier, much more clever. I think they went low. Duck puns just got old very quickly for me.
As the self-appointed backstop of what's happening to this comedic script, I do think it failed. It's a bummer because it had a lot of great lines, and it had a lot of lines like that you said that could have been. Instead of 3 out of 4 working, it was like 1 out of 3 working, and then there should have been a 4th that was attempted that wasn't even attempted.
Next thing I was going to say on my notes is Devon's all about percentages. I was going to ask you the percentage.
Find a way to get percentages involved here. Damn it, I did it.
Fair enough. I have a feeling Mel's going to agree.
I felt it was maybe too many quips. Like it just towards the end of the movie, I started to think, okay, still piling on like a lot of. I actually found there were some like leading comedic moments. Their server at the diner, I thought she was actually kind of funny.
She was great. She was. I thought about mentioning the performance sections, but I cut it for time. But she was great. She delivered it great. I think that's more of a performance thing. I think she made average lines better.
Yeah, I agree. I was like, oh.
She was the opposite of Tim Robbins.
She was exactly the opposite.
We're not
perfect.
Well,
she was,
and she made them funnier.
Yeah,
and he took lines that could have been funny and just made them too big or ridiculous. Yeah,
mauled them into the ground.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into Mel territory, I think, and I've alluded to some of this already as relates to structure. The shift to the Dark Overlords feels like an abrupt shift in the narrative, both in terms of tone and momentum. Howard's efforts to assimilate are too brief to be impactful, and as a result, feel like a weird sidetrack. The film overall seems to lose sight of Howard's goal, getting home. More importantly, Howard himself doesn't seem to be very active in achieving that goal. He's kind of a passive character in that way, and it turns out to be Phil who opens the door to getting things back on track. Also, the incident with the Dark Lord needed to be more directly connected to Howard getting back. To be clearer, Howard should have been there at the facility when the bad thing happened that brought the Dark Lord, instead of like they were prepping the device and we hear about it after the fact. Howard should have been there, I think, to, again, making this character more active, keeping us involved in the narrative. And that also would have worked a whole lot better if Howard had been on Earth for a longer period of time, which I'll get to in a moment. So the two incidences don't feel as convenient with one another. So in terms of structure, I thought there was a lot of odd shifts and turns, Mel. The result of that is Howard, I think, being a passive character and then losing their through line.
I agree with all of that. I have a lot of other, like, where do I begin? I feel like Howard didn't have, like, really a strong emotional journey. I didn't know what I was tracking with him. If his thing is that he wants to go home, why? But wasn't able to track that, like, emotionally enough. I agree, like, the whole demon thing didn't feel tied into Howard and his plot line, and it could have been. There was a way to make this, like, a little meaningful. My biggest thing was I had a lot of issues with, like, people's acceptance of him as a duck and how it was, like, handled, and I know this is like a genre or tone thing. It's like it's not realistic, but then it's like some people would see him and fully like scream. I just did not buy how quickly she's like, "Come home with me." There was not, I don't know, if things needed to move that quickly between those two characters, it was not done tactfully, I don't think.
They missed a couple beats. I think it wouldn't have taken that much more. I think just a couple beats connecting them wasn't that far off. And one of the reasons it wasn't that far off for me is Lea Thompson.
Yeah.
Devin, I have more, but maybe I'll let you opine a little bit.
I mostly just agree with what both of you were saying.
In terms of Howard's journey, I agree that it wasn't there. But what I think it was supposed to be, in terms of like home, I think home, like it's the ET thing again. I think home is something that we can understand and doesn't need that much setup. Like I bought the desire to go home instead of being a strange thing on a planet. Now, if more people reacted with the screaming like you talked about, that would have fed into understanding that more, maybe, I don't know. But I think home is something that is generally understood and doesn't need as much establishment as potentially some other needs. However, what I think his journey was supposed to be is related to Beverly in the sense that him becoming more selfless to the point where he is willing to risk, and what he eventually does is risk this idea of home to find that there is a life outside of home. You know what I mean? It's almost the opposite of the Dorothy complex. Instead of there's no place like home, there are other places that could be home. That's supposed to be his journey. I completely agree that they missed it. You can see the threads of it there, but they didn't connect the dots in a meaningful way. But I think that's supposed to be what it is. Like, yes, his desires to go home, which my point was, I think they completely lost track of that along the way. That was his need that they didn't focus on. But I think the idea is the evolution of that need to being something more about his future with Beverly, which I'll talk about a little later. The seeds were there.
Yeah, I think it's true. Like, we all understand the desire to go home, but also like home means something so different to everyone. It felt muddled to me what home meant to him because his life seemed a bit sad, but that he really wanted to go back.
Except he had all these women. Did you notice?
Yeah. It felt muddy. It's like they could have made a stronger decision, I think, even if he doesn't like his home.
All of this leads to my next thing about plot. It sounds like Devin's done. Do you have more, Devin?
I was briefly going to add that this does touch on one of the things I do like about the movie, though, which is it kind of unapologetically doesn't succeed at one of those things it's intending to do, but says, it's still kind of cool, though. You should figure it out for yourself. It's like this weird philosophical sense of home that it's exploring, where it's not just home as a location, of course. You are completely the mirror opposite of everything that brings comfort or security or any other sense of home. Like, that is such an extreme archetypal example of turning home inside out that I think it's saying, just, that's enough just in itself, and we don't have to make it, sing at the end. But It would have been better if they made it actually sing at the end.
One of the many corners they cut, like, it feels like there's so many beats missing.
Yeah.
So all this sort of ties into the plot elements that I want to talk about. Just now we were talking about the home element. So the origin story is one of the main things in terms of plot. What you guys may not know, I think Devin might, is this origin story, this opening sequence was tacked on last minute. It was a reshoot kind of thing, studio ordered reshoot. And I feel like it set a bad tone. I feel strongly that the film should have started with Howard already here on Earth, already trying to survive in the shadows, and the inciting incident is meeting Beverly or being discovered by Beverly or something akin to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backstory. They're already here, they already exist, and then a lot of that origin stuff we can reveal like an onion as the film goes along. I think that would have been more compelling to me, and also would have just started off on a better foot. It would have allowed more time, I think, too, for the Beverly-Howard relationship to evolve in a way where, like, maybe she meets him and she thinks it's weird, but then she's like curious, like, I'm already inventing a new story, but she's like curious about, like, that was a duck, but he saved me, and maybe I'll bring him a banana the next day, and let it sort of step up towards something that has some meaning.
I agree. I think that would have kept the whole thing more focused and made it actually would have been sitting more squarely in that noir tone.
From the comics. A lot of this is based on the comics.
Because it's like he's already here. You don't even know how long he's been here, kind of suffering the way a noir protagonist is supposed to be suffering. And that would have kept it in that zone in a simpler place. And then when we introduce Beverly, I think that would have been interesting.
Yeah, I guess it would be interesting to see. I was thinking, like, as it happened, I was like, this is too early to actually be inciting the movie. How would we understand how long he's been there? And
I think you infer a lot of those things. You know,
Yeah.
if he's got a system, like if he's got a living system, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comes to mind. Like right away, you get a sense that they've been there for a bit and they've orchestrated a way to hide, a way to stay in the shadows, which is one of their taglines, I guess. But
Yeah.
you know, like they have the backstory. You know, April O'Neil eventually asks her, she's a reporter, and you figure it out. They're pre-existing, which just saves time. Potentially, like what makes it interesting then is one of Howard's goals then becomes, how did he get here? Maybe he didn't ever find out. Beverly finds a way to help him because her connection to humankind. I'm rewriting the whole script, but I've got this vision, guys.
No, I agree, that's more interesting. It would have given the story more room to organically reveal that information rather than like show a duck falling through space.
She said organically this time, not me. The other thing that I want to talk about in terms of plot-wise is the villain itself. And villains are so important to movies like this. The Dark Overlords are a part of the Howard comics and the MCU in general. But there is no setup here. They were just suddenly there, and their goals are murky. I know their goals from the comics, but here they weren't really established. The one we encounter seems powerful enough. Why does he need his friends, for example? The whole subplot seems like an afterthought, and then suddenly becomes the main thrust of the movie. I think a switch to a general perspective might have been more useful here. Not just one cutaway to the Dark Overlords or the potential of their coming, but overall a foreboding of potential of the Dark Overlords coming. Along the same lines, the end feels like it relied too much on, ready for it, contrivances and Deus Ex Machina. The very end of the movie, like the climax is what the word I was looking for. So I just overall, the villain sort of leads me to this, but setup is what this movie needed. It doesn't need to be much. It just didn't take the time to do it, Mel.
Yeah, I didn't even understand. It was just very random. It's like, what is happening to this man? And then and I actually still don't know how it ties into him.
Oh, well, the same thing that brought him down brought the Dark Overlords down. That's a good segue to my next point, which ties directly into the modern MCU, because what I think this needed to be is what we now think of as the multiverse. That explains Howard's world a lot more and is now as accepted as canon in the MCU. I think that was the original intention, even back in 1986, but I think there was concern over whether the audience would swallow it. But we live in a world now where an Oscar-winning film featured a spider pig. So I think it's time for the return of Howard the Duck in a more meaningful way, in a way that was meant to be. Devon, I feel like this is all about the multiverse.
I agree. Without it, that's why we had the hodgepodge. With it, would have kept it together.
Mel isn't as much of a Marvel person as you and I, so she might not grasp this as much.
Are you really a Marvel person?
We both are. Do you know what the multiverse is?
I have some baseline understanding. All the superheroes coexist.
It's not just all the superheroes; just multiple universes coexist. And now in the world of Marvel, they have intersected. So I guess the point being that having a planet that mirrors ours.
We're ducks of the dominant species.
We're ducks of the dominant species makes more sense than a multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
So, Devon, it's time for your favorite part. What time is it?
The T word?
It is time for the T word, and I'm not even sure if Mel knows what this is. T word is themes, where we talk about themes. We had a person, the founder of the show back in 2015, 2016, hated talking about themes. He thought it ruined the movie. The rest of us that did want to talk about them, we'd have to dance around it. We call the T word. Segment is born. I'm sure you're probably wondering, what the heck is JB going to talk about as the themes of Howard the Duck? So first of all, before Mel blows a gasket, I'll acknowledge that none of these themes are tackled very successfully. And several of them are not only in common to comic book films, but to Marvel properties in general, specifically Marvel. But the most successful theme to me, grading on a curve, of course, is also the one that makes the IP so interesting to me. And that is love in all its forms. The most famous, not most famous line, but one of the famous lines that we hear a lot is, love is love is love is love. This film seemed to really want to explore that relationship between Beverly and Howard in a real way. I know it jokes around with the sexuality a little bit, but I think it really wants to establish a genuine connection between them, but consistently pulls back out of presumably studio-driven fear. Even the very last moment of the film has some terms of endearment, very sweet, and then fades to black before it goes just a little too far because they didn't want to make an audience uncomfortable. And again, I'm talking about romantic love versus sexual. And I'm not talking about bestiality in any way. Howard's appearance is something akin to what we would consider a duck, but his personality, his traits, his inner self is what we consider human. And that is why I think all the choices that were made in the character, the human hands, the human eyes, tried to walk that line a little bit more, take him away from Duck World and make him more of a split. Now, how does this concept apply to the real world? I mean, I think it has a lot to do with same-sex couples, for example, LGBTQ, but also mixed marriages of all kinds, and not even marriage necessarily, just relationships. I think the idea behind certainly the comic, and I think the film wanted to be about this and didn't have an opportunity for one reason or another. We love who we love, and that's okay. And no one on the outside should be judgmental about that, which leads directly to my next theme. So I'm going to go straight and go through all the themes because they're sort of tied together, and then we could talk about all of them en masse. So my next theme is more of a global conceptualization of the same thing, and that's tolerance. It's very similar, but a little bit bigger because it's not just about tolerance of who people love, but tolerance of that which is different. You see a lot of this in the comic universe, perhaps most effectively in the X-Men series. The comics of Howard the Duck dig into this deeper, but in many ways, Howard is persecuted by sight alone. And obviously, this is a failure of the film because it could have been more, and Mel made that point, and should have been more. And a lot of these themes are about what the film should have been or could have been more of. It's all there, but none of it is really drawn out. And I think we've all said that to some degree. So only a handful of people in the world give Harold a chance. The film turns this into a gag more often than not. It is at least consistent fear and disgust of how he looks and not who he is. And the final theme is quick, so I'm just going to throw it in here because it's not very well handled in the film, but science and technology is a thing in the film. It's a big part of the plot. There's only a line or two that talks about the questions related to morality as pertaining to science and technology, the ramifications of experimentations versus the progress that could come from scientific exploration. It's right there waiting to be dealt with on some level, and the film just lets it lay there, too interested in its slapstick. I think there need to be more consequences for the Dynatech team, or at least stakes, something to hammer this home a little more. I'm not suggesting it was a goal of the filmmakers so much as potential that could have been realized easily. Guys, I got love in and of itself as opposed, like we love who we want kind of thing. And tolerance, which is connected in science and technology, is the themes that should have been Howard the Duck. And I feel like the pieces are all there. They just didn't connect them. That's what I got on Howard the Duck. Anybody have anything on any of those things?
I mean, I think the love theme is interesting because I was thinking about it because it makes me very uncomfortable, the thought of a woman with a duck. I don't know, but I was trying to think through other movies that kind of do that kind of thing or whatever. And I realized what was the really serious movie monster?
Oh, Shape of Water.
Shape of Water. Yeah, that's another thing. Which I remember in that movie being, it's obviously still a bit weird, but I remember my mind being much more open. I was very with it, but in this movie I was very whoa. Yeah, like you said, maybe it wasn't successfully honing in on that theme or making me, but I did understand they're trying to show an emotional connection.
I wanted them to challenge themselves, and I want them to go a little deeper in that. I think that could have really resonated in a bigger way, but I feel like they kept falling short. But they made it a joke. Oh, he's my boyfriend, and they made it a joke. But I think she felt those feelings. Really like the way Lea Thompson performed it, for sure. But I think there's something there. And I think The Shape of Water is a really good reference. You think about it as a woman having, a relationship with a duck, but I don't think of him as a duck. You know what I mean? Because he is, in his world, he's human. So, and he's so anthropomorphic. He's short, certainly. I also, I would take it to the next step, because I think it'd be fascinating for them to be okay, we care about each other, but sex is not a thing that we can, it's not going to, physiologically not going to work. How do we deal with that? I'd be fascinated by that kind of thing. This idea, there's people that can't consummate this, but they still have this love, or can't consummate it, properly, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that fascinates me. I think just the potential of all this is there. And I didn't find it disgusting that much. I'm used to the character, supposedly. I've seen the character many times over the years or whatever, but I don't think of him as a duck.
Not that we should dwell on this too long, but the main reason that bestiality is not okay, because
they don't have a choice,
is because there's no possibility for consent.
Yeah.
And so this is a situation in which there are two completely conscious individuals who have those human qualities, like you're saying. And so it would be a very odd choice for her, but it's her choice to make. we are all in agreement that it didn't strike the chords of these themes well enough. There was more potential there that they left out on the table. With the tolerance theme, they hit that a number of times in terms of Howard being so curmudgeonly about everyone's reactions to him. They did try to make that.
That's what I meant. It's all there, just not because, to Mel's point, they also undercut it on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
You know, in the comics, like, he's bitter because he has a hard time fitting in.
Yeah.
Everybody hates him at sight. That could have been interesting. The one thing I do want to respond to, Devin, is, like, I agree with everything you said, but I do think that the love theme is the one they came the closest to. Every time I felt like they connected, they were interrupted. Like, I felt like they were leading to a certain way and, like, winking, like, this is a thing, and then, you know, the rug got pulled up from one thing or another, you know, and it just felt like there were longer scenes that were cut out for one reason or another, or they were forced to curb that a little bit. Almost the most disappointing that they didn't get to fully realize it.
You know, if this movie came out bizarrely like last year, I still think it would not be successful, but I think it would be more successful in the sense that people, our society, our culture now kind of is more open to bizarre, culty things. It's interesting that this was ahead of its time in the way that it failed.
And part of why it's a cult, has a cult following.
Yeah.
Howard the Duck was in Guardians of the Galaxy. Howard the Duck was in Infinity War. I think Marvel has a plan for Howard the Duck. You know how Kevin Feige is. He's got long view that he does.
Well, I would have done a better job with this appearance on this show if I knew that it's going to get more views because of that.
You laid out the script earlier.
With the multiverse the way it is, they might include this 1986 film as canon somehow. Like,
Use Zoe Deutsch.
maybe she's their daughter, you know,
Yeah.
Who knows? Like, maybe they figured out a system, or even in fertilization. Yeah, we've gotten off track here a little bit.
Can I say one more thing about the love theme?
Sure, please.
I feel it not only like you're talking about it being kind of cut off or interrupted, or like they never let things like play out. I also
And I don't mean sexually.
yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, things were not just cut off too soon, but I think they weren't established well enough and deep enough. Like, to root for love between two people, I need to understand. I need to think that, like, those two people see each other in a way no one else does. You know, like, there are things that make me root for a couple to be together romantically. I don't think they did enough of that work. Her attraction to him seems mostly out of, like, she feels kind of sorry for him.
But then they get to know each other. I agree that the decision to take him home is sudden.
I think she needed to admire more in him to believably fall for him.
And not to bring it back to it, it's really not about my crush, but I mean, like, I what I do believe is the way that she looks at him. I believe her performance. I believe she believes it, I guess, is the point. I completely agree with you from a screenwriting point of view, but when she interacts with him at certain points in the movie, especially the second half, I believe she believes it, for what that's worth.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to move on to another one of Devin's favorite things. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, for the Classic Movie Showdown. All right, this is where two movies go head-to-head in NCAA-style brackets. It'll become clear very shortly because Devin is going to read us the rules. There's many, many different brackets over many different areas, which I'll explain shortly. But Devin, here are the rules.
Here are the rules. Number 1, seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Number 2, films at JB-hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older, which is currently 2007. Number 3, voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Number 4, voters must see both films in JB's presence. Number 5, JB is ineligible to vote, but he can break ties.
So, Mel, you've been at screenings, so you had a somewhat sense of these rules, right?
I've never and never will understand them, but I do participate, yes. As soon as you start going into seeds and the brackets, I'm lost.
You just need to watch basketball with us one March.
Maybe why?
Then it'll all make sense.
It'll all come together.
It kind of will.
We'll all
I mean,
come together on the basketball court.
we have all these brackets. This is actually on the 1986 bracket. So we have a separate bracket just for the top 68 films from 1986. So we have a first round matchup, and Howard the Duck is a number 15 seed. So Devin will be able to tell me. Devin, what does a number 15 seed go up against first round?
Number 2.
Number 2 seed. So we got a number 2 seed and a number 15 seed. And Devin, of course, was at the screening where we did Howard the Duck, so he participated in this vote. You know, the votes happened beforehand, and we reveal them on the show. I do let these guys opine, but the vote is sealed. It's locked. Whatever these guys say won't matter. Well, Devin except in Devin's case, he was at this particular screening. As we said, he did do the vote, so he can tell you what it's up against.
You ready to hear it?
Yes, here we go. What does Howard the Duck go up against?
It's up against the number 2 seed, Top Gun.
Top Gun, yes. The highest grossing film of 1986 goes up against the biggest bomb of 1986, and it just happened that way. That's the matchup, the 2 versus 15 seed. And of course, Top Gun, had its sequel this year, so it's very much the cultural consciousness at the moment. So Devin was at the vote, so I know what he was going to pick. Mel, have you seen Top Gun?
Yes, I have many times. It's actually because of my father, not because of me. He loves that movie.
Who would you vote for, Top Gun or Howard the Duck?
I hate to be mainstream, but Top Gun by quite a lot.
By quite a lot. Okay. So there was no time for me to break in this one. There was a unanimous vote when it happened, and Devin was one of the voters. So I will also let Devin reveal the winner. You got to do better fingers though, so I can be. It's got to be more like that, so that I can know when the time to put up the graphic is. You know what I mean? I need a little ta-da. I will let you reveal the winner because you know the winner, and it was the one you voted for. So instead of telling us what you voted for, tell us what won, and then you can tell us why.
So the big reveal first, huh?
Mm-hmm.
3, 2, 1. Top Gun.
Top Gun did win. The 2 seed moves on. There might be somebody out there that would vote for Howard the Duck, but there's a reason Howard the Duck is a 15 seed. Why did you choose Top Gun?
Overall, it succeeds at doing what it sets out to do. Strangely, though, the majority of the time, if I had a random couple of hours in front of me and nothing else to do and felt like watching a movie from 1986, I'd probably choose Howard the Duck over Top Gun.
Interesting, but rewatchability is not a factor in your vote.
Yeah, especially because it's a very specific kind of rewatchability. I'm really just curious. I haven't seen it as often, and I haven't seen it as recently.
It's almost like oversaturation in the marketplace makes that vote not as clear to you.
Yeah.
So for me, I also, believe it or not, would have choose Top Gun. It is a little closer for me than it is for Mel, but. We didn't really discuss this, at the time, but I do think while there's some things I enjoy about Howard the Duck, and even though Top Gun has plenty of silly moments as well, it's amazingly better at telling its story. It's strange to say that about Top Gun, but it does a better job of the basics of storytelling. I think Howard the Duck honestly had more potential.
Yeah, I haven't watched Top Gun with a critical eye. It's been a long time since what I remember is I remember being moved. I remember just following and tracking things and not feeling like things are coming out of left field. And the soundtrack. The soundtrack's really fun.
I was staying with a friend upstate the other day, and we were talking about the best soundtracks of the 80s. She kept talking about Sound Almost Fire. I'm like, that is a good song. But if we're going to talk about soundtrack, I do think Top Gun might take the cake. In terms of soup to nuts, track 1 through 10, it's hit after hit after hit. I think it's Top Gun, best soundtrack of the 80s.
I would need more research before I sign on to that.
Fair enough. Nell, it's the end of your first show. You've been through it all. We've been talking about this for a long time, and now you've done it. One in the books. How do you feel?
I think as with all discussions led by you, JB, I do think my mind, I came into this I did not like this movie, but my mind is a little more open to it's helpful to break down what failed about it and the potential it held, and it's good to talk about it. So
is it fair to say you have a newfound respect for Howard the Duck?
I'm not sure I'd go that
far. I set her up for that. I was planning that kind of reaction. All right, Devin, closing thoughts.
Do I have any closing thoughts? No, I think my closing thought was the idea that even though my vote overall in the bracket is for Top Gun, on a crazy given day, fictional day in my near future, deciding which one to watch, I'm strangely going to want to watch Howard the Duck. And I think that's interesting. And I think, as per Mel's point, it's partially due to some of the ideas that come out in discussions like this. And that's kind of cool.
Just to tease the sound off that's coming up on Monday that Mel's going to be in. We're going to reveal our worst films of 1986. There are plenty worse films from 1986 than Howard the Duck. And I think Devin might even agree with that.
Oh, yes. There were some horrendous films.
All right, so the trivia for the next classic is the following. We're going to go back to a film series that we've explored 3 other times over the history of the show. So it's vague, but fans, I'm relying on you fans to get this one. The next up is going to be our sound off. Like I said, Mel's going to be there, and she's going to meet Max for the first time. We have 54th sound off, in which I'm going to do a book review, and then we're going to do our annual tweet beat, where we go over the finale episodes, answer your questions based on the finale episodes, and our top 10 films of 2021, the Oscar preview of 2021 that Devon was on, and also the 1986 in review, of course. In addition to that, we're going to reveal our top 5 films of 1986, some of which, at least for me, did not even come up on the 1986 in review. So there'll be some new films to talk about there. All right, guys, if everybody's good, it's time to say goodnight to the audience.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right, Devon's
Signing
gonna.
off from Chavez Ravine.
Devon's at Chavez Ravine. I'm in New York, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.